stand on the beach at Dunwich, Suffolk, and stare at the waves. Listen carefully on a stormy night, and locals swear you'll hear something impossible, church bells ringing beneath the water. The ghostly toll of 8 medieval churches calling from beneath the North Sea. This isn't folklore. This isn't legend. This is the haunting reality of Dunwich, a city that once rivaled London in size, now reduced to a handful of houses clinging to an eroding cliff. In 1300, Dunwich was one of England's greatest ports. 10,000 people lived within walls that rivaled the city of London in physical size. 18 churches reached toward heaven. Ships from across Europe crowded its bustling harbor. Merchants grew wealthy trading wool, fish, and grain. This was power. This was prosperity. This was permanence. Or so they thought. Today, Dunwich is a village of fewer than 200 souls. But beneath the waves, just offshore, lies an entire medieval city. Streets paved with stone. Market squares that once rang with commerce. Churches where thousands worshipped. Homes where families lived for generations. All swallowed by the sea, piece by piece, century by century. This is the story of Britain's Atlantis, a city that didn't sink in catastrophe, but disappeared one wave at a time, and the erosion hasn't stopped. What little remains today won't survive another 100 years. This is Dunwich, the village that disappeared, the city swallowed by the sea. The golden age. To understand what was lost, you need to see Dunwich at its height. Close your eyes and step back to 1250. You're standing in one of England's most important cities. The population approaches 10,000, massive for medieval England. Only London, York, and Norwich are larger. Dunwich's physical footprint matches the city of London itself, though more spread out along the coast. Walk through the bustling streets and you pass constant activity. Shipbuilders hammer in yards along the waterfront. Fishermen unload catches from the North Sea, herring, cod, shellfish in staggering quantities. Merchants haggle over prices of wool bound for Flanders. The harbor bristles with masts of ships from France, the Low Countries, Scandinavia. The city boasts 18 religious buildings. Churches dedicated to every saint imaginable: St. Peter's, St. John's, St. Nicholas, St. Martin's, St. Leonard's, St. Michael's, St. Bartholomew's, All Saints. 3 monasteries: Greyfriars, Blackfriars, and the Templar Church of St. Mary's. A leper hospital dedicated to St. James. The market square thrums with commerce every week. Stalls sell everything: tools, cloth, food, livestock. This isn't just local trade. Dunwich merchants export to London and continental Europe. The town mints its own coins. It sends 2 members to Parliament, a privilege of its status and wealth. Look at the harbor and you see Dunwich's lifeline. Ships crowd the wharves. Warehouses store goods awaiting export. Look at the harbor and you see Dunwich's lifeline. Ships crowd the wharves. Warehouses store goods awaiting export. Customs officials collect taxes. This harbor made everything possible. Control of sea trade meant power, and Dunwich controlled significant trade routes. The wealthy elite lived in substantial houses. Stone construction, multiple rooms, evidence of comfort unknown to most medieval English. Merchants, ship owners, and church officials enjoyed prosperity that would make them comfortable, even by modern standards. But Dunwich wasn't just wealthy, it was strategically important. Kings relied on Dunwich ships for naval campaigns. Edward III impressed Dunwich vessels for the 100 Years' War. Henry VIII used Dunwich shipyards. This was a town that mattered politically and militarily. The irony cuts deep. At the very moment Dunwich reached its zenith, the forces of its destruction were already at work. Even as builders erected grand churches, the sea gnawed the coastline. Even as merchants counted profits, storms battered the harbor. Even as the population swelled, the land beneath their feet was doomed. Between 1066 and 1086, just 20 years, Dunwich lost half its farmland to coastal erosion. The Doomsday Book records this catastrophic loss. Yet the city rebuilt, adapted, and continued growing. Residents must have known the threat. They built sea defenses. They dug dikes. They fought the ocean. For a while, human ingenuity seemed enough. The harbor remained functional. Trade continued. The city prospered. Residents likely believed their walls and defenses would hold forever. They were tragically wrong. To understand what was lost, you need to see Dunwich at its height. Close your eyes and step back to 1250. You're standing in one of England's most important cities. The population approaches 10,000, massive for medieval England. Only London, York, and Norwich are larger. Dunwich's physical footprint matches the City of London itself, though more spread out along the coast. Walk through the bustling streets and you pass constant activity. Shipbuilders hammer in yards along the waterfront. Fishermen unload catches from the North Sea, herring, cod, shellfish in staggering quantities. Merchants haggle over prices of wool bound for Flanders. The harbor bristles with masts of ships from France, the Low Countries, Scandinavia. The city boasts 18 religious buildings. Churches dedicated to every saint imaginable: St. Peter's, St. John's, St. Nicholas, St. Martin's, St. Leonard's, St. Michael's, St. Bartholomew's, All Saints. 3 monasteries, Greyfriars, Blackfriars, and the Templar Church of St. Mary's. A leper hospital dedicated to St. James. These aren't small chapels, but substantial stone structures, testaments to wealth and piety. The market square thrums with commerce every week. Stalls sell everything: tools, cloth, food, livestock. This isn't just local trade. Dunwich merchants export to London and continental Europe. The town mints its own coins. It sends 2 members to Parliament, a privilege of its status and wealth. Look at the harbor and you see Dunwich's lifeline. Ships crowd the wharves. Warehouses store goods awaiting export. Customs officials collect taxes. This harbor made everything possible. Control of sea trade meant power, and Dunwich controlled significant trade routes. The wealthy elite lived in substantial houses. Stone construction, multiple rooms, evidence of comfort unknown to most medieval English. Merchants, shipowners, and church officials enjoyed prosperity that would make them comfortable, even by modern standards. But Dunwich wasn't just wealthy, it was strategically important. Kings relied on Dunwich ships for naval campaigns. Edward III impressed Dunwich vessels for the 100 Years' War. Henry VIII used Dunwich shipyards. This was a town that mattered politically and militarily. The irony cuts deep. At the very moment Dunwich reached its zenith, the forces of its destruction were already at work. Between 1066 and 1086, just 20 years, Dunwich lost half its farmland to coastal erosion. The Doomsday Book records this catastrophic loss. Yet the city rebuilt, adapted, and continued growing. Residents must have known the threat. They built sea defenses. They dug dikes. They fought the ocean. For a while, human ingenuity seemed enough. The harbor remained functional, trade continued, the city prospered. Residents likely believed their walls and defenses would hold forever. They were tragically wrong. The death of Dunwich didn't come suddenly. It came in waves, literally. 1286 marked the first catastrophic blow. A massive storm surge hit the East Anglian coast with unprecedented fury. We don't have exact casualty figures, but contemporary accounts describe devastation. Buildings collapsed. Ships were thrown inland. Coastal defenses crumbled. Worse than the immediate damage, the storm changed the harbor itself. The violence of the waves shifted sediment, began the formation of a shingle bar called Kingsholm that would prove fatal to Dunwich's maritime economy. Then came 1288, just 2 years later. Another massive storm, perhaps even more powerful. Again, the waves smashed Dunwich's coastline. More buildings lost. More land claimed by the sea. More damage to the critical harbor. February 1328 brought yet another devastating tempest. By now, the pattern was clear. Dunwich faced an enemy it couldn't defeat. The wealthy began leaving. Why invest in a city the sea was actively destroying? The Kingsholm shingle bar grew larger, progressively blocking the harbor entrance. Ships that once docked easily now struggled to enter. Large merchant vessels couldn't access Dunwich at all. Trade began shifting to nearby Southwold and Walberswick, where harbors remained functional. 1347 delivered another crushing blow. Over 400 houses washed away in a single storm. Think about that number. 400 families, potentially 2,000 people, lost their homes in one night. Many drowned. Survivors fled inland. The population hemorrhaged. The economic spiral became irreversible. Fewer ships meant less trade. Less trade meant less wealth. Less wealth meant the city couldn't maintain sea defenses. Weaker defenses meant more erosion. More erosion drove more people away. Each factor amplified the others in a death spiral. By 1348, the Black Death arrived, as if Dunwich's suffering wasn't complete. The plague killed perhaps a third of the remaining population. Labor shortages meant abandoned buildings, unmaintained walls, failing infrastructure. The wealthy who might have funded recovery were dead or gone. The River Blyth, which fed Dunwich's harbor, shifted its mouth 2.5 miles north to Walberswick. This geographical change destroyed what remained of Dunwich's maritime economy. A port without harbor access is just a beach. 1570 brought another vicious storm on Candlemas Day. Homes and market stalls swept into the sea. More streets disappeared. By now, Dunwich was a shadow of its former self, but still the erosion continued. Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries in the 1530s removed another pillar of Dunwich's economy. Greyfriars, Blackfriars, and St. Mary's had provided employment, attracted pilgrims, generated revenue for coastal defense maintenance. With the monasteries gone, so went that income. The irony is bitter. Henry VIII had used Dunwich shipyards for naval construction. The very king who benefited from Dunwich's maritime expertise implemented policies that hastened its demise. By 1600, Dunwich's population had crashed to a quarter of its peak. The once great port was now a modest fishing village. Most of the aiding churches were gone, collapsed into the sea, or abandoned as populations, shrank below sustainable levels for maintenance. Yet even as a shadow of its former self, Dunwich retained parliamentary representation. Until the Reform Act of 1832, The ruined village sent 2 members to Parliament, despite having virtually no voters. It became one of Britain's most notorious rotten boroughs, political representation utterly disconnected from actual population. The final indignity. In 1886, the corporation was abolished. Dunwich no longer existed as a legal entity. It was just a place, fading from history. All Saints' Church, the last witness. Of all Dunwich's 18 medieval churches, All Saints became the most poignant symbol of the city's slow death. Originally built far from the coastline, All Saints stood solid through the medieval period. But century by century, the sea crept closer. What once sat safely inland gradually approached the cliff edge. By the 1700s, the church's position had become precarious. The coastline had retreated so far that All Saints now perched close to the cliff. Each major storm brought it closer to the edge. Each winter saw more land lost. 1755 marked the last time All Saints had a rector. The parishioners had dwindled to the point where maintaining a dedicated priest made no economic sense. The church fell into disrepair, though it remained standing, a Gothic monument to lost glory. By the Victorian era, All Saints had become a ruin and a tourist attraction. Romantic poets and artists made pilgrimages to witness its eerie beauty. The church stood roofless, walls crumbling, yet somehow still proud against the sky. Behind it, the North Sea roared closer every year. Photographs from the late 1800s show the church teetering on the cliff edge. In some images, you can see how close to the drop the building stood. Gravestones tilted at crazy angles as the ground beneath them eroded. The churchyard itself was falling into the waves, scattering the bones of people buried centuries earlier. Local legend held that the church bells would ring one last time as the building fell. Whether this actually happened, we'll never know. But the image captured imaginations, the dying toll of All Saints calling from the abyss. 1892 saw the final service held in the ruined church. After that, it was deemed too dangerous. The coastal path was diverted inland. All Saints stood abandoned, waiting for the inevitable. 1919 brought a particularly fierce storm. The sea's patience ended. The tower, which had stood for centuries, finally collapsed. Witnesses described a waterfall of bones cascading down the cliff skulls, ribs, femurs from the graveyard, tumbling into the waves below. The remaining walls held on through 1921. Then, piece by piece, they too fell. Stone blocks crashed onto the beach. Gothic arches that had framed prayers for 400 years shattered on the shore. 1922 saw the final major collapse. A photograph exists of the moment just before the last fragment of tower tottering on the cliff edge, the void of sky and sea behind it. Then it was gone. Today, one gravestone survives from All Saints Churchyard. It belongs to Jacob Forster and sits in the modern church, rescued before the sea could claim it. This single stone represents hundreds lost entire generations of Dunwich residents whose graves now lie beneath the North Sea. On the beach at low tide, you can still find stones from All Saints. They're smoothed by wave action, jumbled among the pebbles, but distinctive if you know what to look for. Touch one, and you're touching a piece of medieval Dunwich, a fragment of the lost city. The church bells, locals insist, still ring beneath the waves during storms. Fishermen report hearing them. Residents claim the sound carries on certain winds. Skeptics dismiss it as folklore. But stand on Dunwich Beach during a gale when waves crash and wind howls and listen. Is that sound just wind and water? Or could it be, impossibly, the echo of All Saints calling from beneath the sea? Whether real or imagined, those phantom bells symbolize something true. Dunwich won't let itself be forgotten. The city might lie beneath the waves, but its memory refuses to stay submerged. Mapping the lost city for centuries, the full extent of lost Dunwich existed only in imagination and fragmentary records. Medieval documents mentioned streets, churches, and buildings, but their locations were unknown. The city beneath the waves remained a mystery. 1589 brought the first attempt at understanding. Ralph Agaz, a Suffolk surveyor and cartographer, created a detailed map of what remained of Dunwich. His work was revolutionary, showing streets abruptly cut off by the sea, hinting at the vastness of what was lost. Agaz created this map as part of a failed attempt to revive the port. He understood that Dunwich's decline wasn't inevitable if the harbor could be reopened. But his reform project never gained traction. His map, however, survived, copied into Thomas Gardner's 18th century history of Dunwich. This map became crucial for historians. By showing where streets ended at the waterline, Agaz allowed later researchers to extrapolate where those streets must have continued under the waves. It provided a skeleton map of the drowned city. But for centuries, that's all anyone had. Speculation based on old maps and fragmentary records. What actually lay beneath the North Sea remained unknown. The mud, silt, and poor visibility made underwater exploration nearly impossible with available technology. Locals and fishermen told stories. Net snagging on underwater structures, objects dredged from the seabed, stones different from natural formations. But without systematic exploration, these were just anecdotes. The 1970s brought a breakthrough. Stuart Bacon, a local diver, pioneered techniques for exploring the near-zero visibility waters off Dunwich. The North Sea here is murky, cold, and treacherous. Traditional diving methods failed. Bacon developed field-based exploration. Since he couldn't see, he learned to identify materials by touch. Stone dressed for buildings felt different from natural stone. Worked timber versus driftwood, clay brick versus seabed sediment. His hands became his eyes. He found All Saints Church first, relatively close to shore. The discovery proved that Dunwich's ruins hadn't been completely destroyed by the sea. If All Saints remained recognizable, perhaps older structures also survived. Bacon continued finding pieces, carved stone, remnants of walls, artifacts from daily medieval life. But experts remained skeptical. Many archaeologists insisted that 400 years of North Sea action would have destroyed everything. Bacon was finding anomalies, they said, not the lost city. 2008 changed everything. The University of Southampton deployed advanced sonar technology specifically designed for underwater archaeology. This multi-beam sonar could map the seabed in extraordinary detail despite visibility issues. The results were staggering. The sonar revealed streets, buildings, church foundations, and other structures spread across a massive underwater site. Not fragments or traces recognizable urban architecture, largely intact beneath sand and silt. The data showed Dunwich's medieval layout with stunning clarity. The market square, streets running perpendicular to the coast, church foundations spaced throughout the town, defensive walls, harbor structures, an entire city frozen in time beneath the waves. Further research incorporated all available data: Agaz's map, modern surveys, archaeological finds, coastal change analysis, historical records. The result is the most comprehensive map of medieval Dunwich ever created, showing the city as it existed around 1250. This isn't speculation anymore. We know where the streets ran. We know where buildings stood. We can trace property boundaries. The underwater site represents the largest medieval town site in Europe and possibly the world. What the sonar shows is both exciting and melancholy. Exciting because Dunwich is preserved in remarkable detail. Melancholy because it's a memorial to catastrophic loss. Every street, every foundation, every structure represents families displaced, lives disrupted, communities destroyed. The map shows how far the coastline has retreated. From the estimated shoreline of 1050 to today is approximately 1,500 meters. Everything in that zone gone, swallowed, lost to the relentless advance of the North Sea. And the erosion continues. Dunwich loses land every year. What the sonar mapped in 2008 has already changed. By the time today's children are old, more will be lost.